First off, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your time. And if you have questions that I don't have answers to, I have my pad here and I will get those answers to you. So as long as you send me an email, I'll respond right back to you. Before we start, does anybody have any questions about what this is all about? Okay.
Does it apply, we're just talking about what age, middle school's technically fifth grade here, right? So it
Mhm.
applies,
Yeah, mostly you'll find value in it, but it's not going to be immediately applicable. You'll see how
Right.
it's going to parlay out in later years. So we're all talking about math here, and there's been some changes. Some people in the community have been wondering about some of these rumors that they're hearing about schedule changes and things like that. This is mostly what I think they're talking about. Our current math classes, and this is what I understand has been going on for quite some time, that grade 6 has one math course, Math 6. Grade 7 has one math course, and grade 8 actually has two. One is algebra 1 and geometry. Now typically, when you're looking at a progression of mathematics courses, you'll have grade 6, grade 7, and then a general grade 8 math, and then an accelerated track, which would be algebra 1, and even more accelerated track would be geometry. Okay? The thing is about our grade 8 is that we don't have the grade 8 general or standard course. So after conversations with our math teachers, when we noticed this, they felt that this was needed, which it is, and I feel that some parents have echoed the same sentiment. So our proposal for 2025 to 2026 was to keep grade 6 the same as you would typically see in middle schools. But for grade 7, we're going to add an Algebra 1 course. And you'll see how this works out for the following year. We're going to add the Algebra 1 course because there are some students that have an affinity for math and things of that nature, and we think it's appropriate for that higher percentage for that small percentage of students. And grade 8, as you can see, it's not just Algebra 1 anymore, or Algebra 1 in geometry. It's grade 8 standard math class, which isn't a dropping of standards, it's meeting the expectations. Now, if I go back just one slide here, I want you to notice that in grade 8, the students would have the opportunity to take Algebra 1, but some students would have the opportunity to take Algebra 1 and geometry. So they would have to give up something to go on that course. Okay? And that's a really, really heavy lift. So as I again mentioned, the proposal is what we're putting in the schedule for next year, is adding the Algebra 1 for grade 7, and adding a grade 8 math course standard. Now you also notice, you also notice that we've separated these two, just like in the current year, and the kids still have the opportunity to have Algebra 1 and geometry. And the reason why we did that is because to separate those two, to have somebody go from a standard 7th grade math class straight up to geometry without a foundational piece of Algebra 1, hi. Hello.
Hey.
Without that foundational piece, they wouldn't do well. So that's one of the reasons why, I guess, in the history of RVS, they've allowed them to double up because it's a necessity. Yes?
So do you have to double up, or can you go to Algebra 1 in 7th grade and geometry in 8th grade? Or do you take Algebra 1 again?
Well, this is just for next year. I'm going to answer your question probably in 1 second as I move to the next year. One of the reasons why we did this, again, is because if we have those kids that are currently in our school and parents that are expecting next year in 8th grade, let me take it one step back here. They're expecting this schedule, right? And next year we go, you know what? It's not appropriate for them to take Algebra 1 and geometry. We just eliminate it or separate it. Then they're at that disadvantage because they didn't have Algebra 1. And so they're still going to have to double up anyway. And then to eliminate them from the pool of geometry, again, that won't be fair because they've been expecting these things at this late hour. I think it would be unfair, especially right before the summer. So, as I mentioned again, for the following year, we're going to keep that. Now, in 26, 27, because
Did answer my question.
because we offered Algebra 1 in 7th grade, now we can rightly say those students that performed very well in Algebra 1, they can go into that track of geometry. And again, having kids take Algebra 1 and geometry at the same time, especially in middle school, is really, really tough. And just to give you a little context, I've had a few middle school experiences, one overseas and one in Milburn where I was the vice principal, and I did all the scheduling. The grade 7 had a standard 7 class and an accelerated. And grade 8 had a standard grade 8, Algebra 1, and those students that were like really exceptional had geometry, we bussed them over to the high school. And that was like 2 or 3 kids at best. So for the kids to have the opportunity here is really good.
Does that mean there's gonna be 3 sections in 8th grade, so there'll be 3 sections of math going on at that math period time, right? So,
Not necessarily at the same time,
okay,
because we may have just one teacher teaching this. And if we,
Okay.
and let's say hypothetically speaking, that there's one student that maybe just got in geometry or just got in algebra and proved to be too much or overwhelming, then at least they'll have the opportunity to switch their schedule and go to a different
okay.
level. My son did that. He was actually 2 grade levels above in mathematics. I forgot what he was taking. I don't even know the name of the course. It was so high. So, and he's like, wow, this is like, he was really struggling with it and he wanted to drop down and he did. My son is very, very good in math, but language arts on the other end, he's equally on the other end of language arts, let's put it that way. Right? So you're going to be amazed now to see the side-by-side comparison. Behold. So if you go from one year to the next, grade 6 is still the same. And grade 7, the next year, we've added the Algebra 1 because we're thinking ahead. And in grade 8 here, we have what it is currently, and then we added the Math 8, and then we separated the Algebra 1 and geometry. Again, we think that this, in conjunction with the teachers thinking, the administration thinks that this is the most appropriate path for kids. And you should also know that we've had Mountain Lakes superintendent, who I'm gotten very friendly with. We talk a lot and we meet a lot. He's come over here along with the assistant superintendent and the math supervisor and the high school math teachers and the middle school math teachers. We had a big meeting, and this is the most appropriate way to track the kids. Now, someone would say, well, what about having an accelerated course between standard math and algebra 1? We've thought about that, but we're not there yet. This is moving, after having something that's been standardized so long, as far as math courses are concerned, we want to take these baby steps. And if it's appropriate for us to have that class, then we'll consider it at that time. Any questions so far?
What are the qualifications for them to go into the Algebra 1 next year?
Aha!
So if I have a 6th grader now, then what qualification? That's
I'm
the
glad
next
you
slide.
asked.
Oh, here we go.
Here's the criteria. Again, having worked with Mountain Lakes and having worked in middle schools before, there are certain things that you have to achieve in certain areas in order to get placed there. So these, the side by side, they're pretty much exactly the same. If I'm a grade 7 kid, we're going to take NJSLA from the grade 6, and those things are going to come in over the summer. Our first, second, and third marking period averages. And this Linkit Form B and Form C, there's a Form A, but it's a benchmark assessment. And basically it assesses you on all the material that you're supposed to know in that grade level. So to include the Form A when the kids don't really know all that material before they've learned it would be unfair. So we do the Form B and Form C. And then of course, the last piece is the Algebra 1 placement exam, which happened just last week. And so I can guess your next question is, well, what levels do they have to achieve in all of these things? Now, I know you're going to have some questions about this, so let me explain once I show you. But before I do, I'm going to ask everybody to give a mental credit to our math teachers because Mr. Monaco, Ms. Flaherty, and Mrs. Savage they've all come up with these things. They worked really hard on having these rubrics and this criteria, and also pushing forward. Since the beginning of the year, when we noticed something about the math, they were on board and they wanted this change as well. Now, I'm going to point out to you that these are percentiles. Now, if I'm in the 50th percentile on the bell curve, that means that I've scored equal to or better than the other 50th percentile, right? So we could all get 100, right? And then the rest of the kids on the bottom half would get 99. So it's kind of weird to do percentiles. However, the reason or the rationale for this is because this is historically or traditionally the way that the kids have fallen in terms of their grading on that bell curve. So then we assigned weights or points to it. And those students who scored in the 80th percentile or greater in their class, or in their grade level rather, on the NJSLA, they would get 20 points. And you all can read this graph. I don't have to go through it with you. But you can imagine that this is a significant assessment, so it has a little bit greater weight. And of course, the Algebra 1 placement exam does also have significant weight. And the last form that we have in the year also has some significant weight too. And these things would account for the child's progress. So it's pretty balanced. And by the way, having worked with Mountain Lakes, again, they have something pretty similar. There's different weights and stuff like that, but something fairly similar. Okay? All right. So let's go over the criteria for the total. And then I'll give you examples. For our 6th graders who are going to 7th grade, who are going to be going into the math classes, we have the standard Math 7 class, and for Algebra 1 is we have the standard class in Algebra 1. For those students that score less than 88 on the scaled score, on that graph that I showed you, they would be in a Math Standard class. And then the 88 and higher would be in the Algebra 1. Okay? A little different for 8th grade. So for Math 8, and again, this is information that I've received from our math teachers, and they've looked back at how many kids, numbers of students, and this percentage or the percentile, they've come up with these things. And we may change this later on to have a raw score, which or a very cut and dry score, that are not percentiles, but I'll get into that in a minute. But for these students, if they scored the 38 or lower, they're automatically going into Math 8. And then listen to the vocabulary here. If they've scored between 39 and 87, they have the opportunity to go into Algebra 1. Can they, or their parents say, we'd rather go into a standard class? Yes. But you can't level up, though. People have asked about teacher recommendation. That puts subjectivity into it. We're going to avoid that. Okay? In my previous district, where I was the assistant principal, we had a strict cut score, and they have that in Mountain Lakes as well. There were also, but in language arts, they also had teacher recommendation, because that maybe is a little subjective, creativity, verbal input in the classroom, so on and so forth. And of course, with algebra and geometry, the student would have to score 88 and above. So what does it look like on that graph? So this particular student, and as you can see here, the Algebra 1 placement exam is not filled in yet. For this particular student, you can see that they did fairly well. And out of 100, so far, well, this is 80, but eventually it'll be out of 100, they got 70. So in order for them to achieve the Algebra 1 in geometry, they would have to get at least 18 points. So that would mean they would have to get the 80th percentile or greater in their Algebra 1 placement exam. Now you can imagine here that may not happen, because even though there may be a lot of effort here, when it comes to their assessments of their skills, on a standardized test especially. Did I just hit
It
this?
just jumped.
I just moved it,
Yeah.
that's right, because I touched it. When it comes down to it, they may not be developmentally ready for that. Now, will they be developmentally ready next year or the year after? We don't know. But it's a possibility. So once the students go into or beyond 8th grade, there are opportunities for kids to take those Algebra 1 courses over the summer, or for them to double up in the high school. And I confirmed this with Dr. Siegel. I'll give you another example. So this student, maybe they had a bad semester here or a marking period, but they've done fairly well, and their total here is a 68 out of 80. So in order for them to get into the Algebra 1 geometry class, they would have to score in the 80th percentile or greater. So I think your wheels are probably going to start turning here about the percentiles. So if my child scores like an 80 on an exam, which is really good, and everybody else scores an 85, or between 85 and 90, well, my child's going to be in like the lowest percentile, even though they did score pretty well. That's the flaw of this model. But one of the reasons why we went with this model is because, again, this is a transition year, and two, this is historically what's happened as far as the percentiles is concerned and the student's performance. So in the future, when we do certain things like this, when a student scores within a range on their NJSLA, we may not use the percentile. We may use that score and say if they scored between 750 and 800, then they would achieve 20 points. So it would be a direct link to their assessments. Now, for example, let's just say in that extreme sense, once again, that we have 100 kids, and 99 out of those 100 kids score between 90 and 770 and 800. And then my child scores exceptionally well and is 759 or 769. They're right below. Even though they're in the lowest percentile, they still had one of the highest grades, the highest categories that you can in NJSLA. So they would still get a 20 point grade for that. Yes?
The percentiles that you're doing for NJSLA, that's going to be compared specifically to their RBS counterparts,
Correct,
not
yes.
the regionalized.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, the reason why we're doing that is because this is the 11th hour, and we have all this information. So we're using what we have for this year and making it a transition year, and going on what has traditionally happened in the past in terms of the students' performance. And then it kind of like doesn't sound or feel right a little bit. Like, all right, I can kind of go along with that, but what about these scenarios again? Now think about this though. What's the likelihood that all the students are going to score on an exam, for example, score between 95 and 100%, and your child will get 94%, and therefore they're in the first percentile? It's not going to happen. That's just the extreme. But that's a caution that we need to take, and that's some of the conversations that we've had, which is, again, one of the reasons why we need to move forward in more like point system type of process, which they have in Mountain Lakes, which we've already examined. But this is good for our purposes right now. Give you another example. Again, what are the chances that this student who didn't perform very well overall is going to get a 20 on their algebra placement exam, one of the hardest exams? Probably not, right? And even if they did, it would be a 50 out of 100. And they would go into, that's right down the center of the bell curve, the percentile, right? They would have the opportunity to go into Algebra 1. But most likely that wouldn't happen. They probably would fall in this category around here somewhere. And even if it was 1 point over, what we would say to the parents is take the time, have a discussion, and take the time and do the math aid. Because if you push too far ahead, and we've seen this quite often, kids lose the foundational skills. I'm going to give you a few examples of this. In the primary grades, when kids have a natural affinity to read, just automaticity, decoding, and all that stuff, it's just natural to them. Then we have a temptation to give them more challenging books. And they can read them, but the comprehension lags. And if you're someone like me who's had that experience from teaching preschool and going all the way into the high school level, once you go into the middle school, you see the same kids and they have a very difficult time with writing. Their writing, it doesn't have a lot of depth to it because they have a difficult time doing the critical thinking skills that are required to formulate a piece. There's a cost that comes to that benefit of those kids being pushed too fast. Foundational skills are extremely, extremely important in mathematics, language arts, and when I moved to Japan to study with my karate master, you think that there would be, like, after I've been training for many, many, many years and being an instructor, you would think that all these wonderful things are going to happen, advanced moves, basics, 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 basics. So we don't want to push kids too far too fast. We want to stretch them in that zone of proximal development where it's just right for them. Not too easy, where they get bored, not too hard, where they get frustrated and quit. Just when you didn't think there was more, there's more. Same scenario here. Most likely, what do you think is going to happen?
What's the question?
The student takes
What
eighth grade
what
math.
what
level?
level do
Going
you
in-
think most likely this child will go into? Mind you, it's,
Eighth
I think
grade.
you're
In
like
eighth grade.
39. Yeah. The 39 is the cut for going into algebra. 38 or lower is math 8, 39 to 87 is algebra.
What is it on the Algebra 1 placement exam? What is it like norm to?
Say again?
What is the Algebra 1 placement exam norm to? Is it norm to like certain 7th grade standards like the SLA, or is it something else?
I'm not sure I understand the question because I'm not the math guy. I'm just,
Oh no, I'm just wondering like because I see that there's Lincoln B, C, and
Mhm.
NJSLA. I'm just wondering like what is the nature of the Algebra 1 placement exam? Like why is that extra assessment necessary? And like what does it measure that the SLA doesn't? That's what I'm saying.
I think one of the things that it measures is their specific skills for algebra to be
Okay.
like to see if they have the mental aptitude to handle those type of abstract concepts. And to be frank, when the teachers put these things together and the
Okay.
math supervisor over there, I'm like, okay, it says algebra placement is, I'm not the algebra guy, I'm a program big vision guy. So if they say that this should be weighted at this much, then that's what we go for.
But it doesn't assume any prior exposure to algebra.
No, not
Okay.
as far as I know.
That's just what my thought process was when I was asking like if it's measuring something other than 7th grade math. So
That's a really, now I understand what you're saying. Is there actually algebra on this? And probably maybe pre-algebraic concepts.
okay,
Like if I'm doing something even in first grade and I'm playing dice with the kids, and there's we have to get a certain number. I'm rolling dice. The kids are in their mind saying there's 3, and what do I need to get the 5? I'm like, I got to roll for a 2. 3 plus what equals 5? It's kind of like maybe the same
Gotcha.
type of basic thinking skills. So in this particular case, this student may not have those skills, and so they would probably fall in this area. And even if they got 8 and they were at 40, then that student, we might have a conversation with the parents and say, you know what, they're right on the cusp there, they may not be ready, it's better to do the foundational math 8 class, which is, again, the main reason why we implemented it. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't understand that question.
At what point will we get the breakdown of how your student performed? Like when will we get like the scale score for our students
Okay,
to determine placement of the recommendation?
Yeah, that's the next question that I forgot about. So this, when we get the NJSLA scores, is usually about early August, unfortunately, and that's when the big piece of it comes in, and that's when we're gonna have to send out emails to the parents, like, we came up with this rubric, and you will have access to this. I mean, you already know what your mark period 1 averages and things like that, but you may not know these things, so we would have to, I'm still thinking of a way, like, how can I do this in Genesis? Let people have access to it. I don't know, but yes, you will have access to this type of information. even if it is something that we print out and we give you that, these scores here, I think you deserve to have that, in full transparency, like parents that are asking, like, how come my child didn't get in? Well, this is the reason why. And again, this is what works for us right now because it is that transition year. It may come down to us, again, saying, all right, if you meet standards on NJSLA, that'll equate to 16 points. If you exceed standards, that'll be 20. And any student who exceeds standards will get 20. And one of the reasons why I personally feel, more passionate about this is when I was doing all the scheduling and we had a significant, like a really, really high number of students that were getting into algebra. And one of the other administrators said, well, obviously it's too easy. We need to, raise the bar. We need to higher the number, And I go, why don't we just add another algebra class? Like if you have 100 kids, or in this case it was 400 kids, and 90% of them are showing that they're, getting all these phenomenal scores, don't make it harder for them. Give them what they deserve,
It's better for you.
Is this
Sorry?
all,
It looks better for your school too.
Yeah,
Your school performs better because those same kids are gonna perform better than on the test if they're being pushed harder.
yeah.
Just like in sports.
If it's appropriate for them, right?
Right.
And because the kids who are taking the NJSLA, if they get into algebra, they're going to have to take the algebra NJSLA. If they're not ready for it, then they won't perform as well.
So this is now we're starting sixth grade. So is the sixth grade placement gonna be based on the fifth grade in
No.
JSLA?
No, we don't do placements like that. There's a point in time where you have to kind of like cut it off because like where does it end or where does it start?
Right.
Some of the private schools they departmentalize even at the elementary school level. You'll have your reading teacher and kids rotate through that. That's a whole different other animal. But again, and they do go through their leveled classes, and so they kind of travel with the group. And at what point do you say, okay, like this is detrimental to their social, emotional growth?
But up until now, have kids been conveyed? Because I didn't really have the understanding that the NJSLA had any impact in how students did in terms of their advancing in schools. I thought it was more for the schools to, as far as funding or whatever. Are the kids going to actually be told this? I mean, the parents who attended now are going to tell their children, hey, this test now matters. In the New York schools, they have kids, like these kids are literally studying prep books to do this, which really isn't the point of these exams. These exams should be to assess students to make sure they are progressing at an appropriate rate.
Yeah.
Now we're
And if
making,
the
and unfortunately now we're
instruction
making this test a performance exam. It's becoming like an SAT. So now, it unfortunately puts more pressure on the kid.
Yeah, and it also gives us some idea of what is being taught or what is not taught. This teacher performance to a certain extent, which is
Right.
what you
But
were
much of the
alluding to before.
much of the curriculum is like geared towards the NJSLA though. So right, I mean for math,
Yeah, it's kind of like
teachers
I guess you could say
right now,
standards
it's like-
based.
So it's kind of like geared towards that exam at the end that helps.
And I understand that. The only thing that I just see this creating, undue pressure on kids.
Yeah.
That we're asking a seventh grader to feel like they're taking an SAT. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing versus the overall, I'm not saying that, the students should still perform. I think that that's something, a society trying to eliminate more and more in younger kids.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Creates a little bit of anxiety.
I
That's the only
couldn't
thing
agree more.
I'm just, I don't know how we convey it to the student to say, hey, this is, every time I talk to my kids, at least as of now, because they're only in fourth grade, I tell them, don't worry about this test, it doesn't matter.
Is this fair?
Um,
Is this all for like all inclusion, like all general ed students? Does are there resource math classes as well, or are we no longer
I'm sorry, say that again.
the resource math classes?
Mhm.
Is that part of this, or are you doing all inclusion?
We're gearing more towards inclusion, however, let's just say, for instance, we have a special ed, a student that has special needs. Most likely, that they would be provided some supports, and if they were held to the same criteria, and they had, dyscalculia, for instance, then they most likely wouldn't be in the algebra or the geometry class.
So this will be special ed and general ed for all.
Oh, yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
So there's no.
Because I've
resource.
had special ed, I was a special ed teacher as well, I've had some special ed students that were phenomenal in math,
Correct.
but they had some very, very difficult challenges with language arts. Unbelievable chess players, unbelievable mathematicians, they would be easily like just blow right through the geometry. So yeah, it's appropriate for them.
So will that be like, if you have a lower level math class, like the math 8, is that gonna be like a special ed and general ed class, like a co-taught,
It's,
or?
it could be co-taught, that's a possibility, but it's not special ed.
Correct, and just the inclusion model where it's a special ed and general ed teacher.
It's a
or-
possibility,
Okay,
yeah. And there also could be a special ed kid in the Algebra 1 class.
of course, yeah.
And by the way, let's not misunderstand, the grade 8, math 8 class is not a lower level class, it's a grade appropriate class for grade 8 standards. So we never had it. So let me just answer that one question in a minute, I wanna address this. I agree with you 100%. And I think it's also, much of it is in how we convey the message to the kids. I think that the kids should know, like, hey, there are these other math classes. Because I've had kids come to me and say, we're not challenged enough. You know, even in the elementary school level, you know, can we have a gifted and talented math class? Can we have this and that? So they want things. I think it's when we convey that energy to them, it's how we convey, you know, our thoughts in terms of their anxiety. So I think we're the major key players. And tethered to that, let's take a look at this. Imagine you're a child in 7th grade, general education, maybe math's not your thing. The following year, you have to go into algebra. That's anxiety provoking. And what we're proposing is to have that alleviated and say, you know what, Math 8 is an option, but you know what, hey, you know what, you're a quick reader. Hey, you're going to read this level book. Hey, you have a natural thing for mathematics, or you have an interest in mathematics. You kind of like it. You scored well. Would you like the opportunity to go into Algebra 1? Not, you have to go into Algebra 1, we have to have this. Oh, you know what, if you don't go into Algebra 1, you have another chance for it in high school. If you really build up some of those foundational skills and you find that you like math, you can catch up if you like. I think it's the adults that are driving the bus. Unfortunately, you know, some kids do take it upon themselves to get that, you know, the anxiousness going, but I think we need to manage it from the adults' perspective anyway. Are you?
Yeah, I had another question. Just in general, what's the rationale for having a high school level algebra in 7th grade and then a high school level geometry in 8th grade? Because in high school, that puts them starting at algebra 2, then pre-calculus and calculus as a junior, and then either BC calculus or stats and probability as a senior, right? So if the recommendations, my understanding, I have 3 kids, and they've all had now a different math curriculum here at RBS. So like I'm trying to wrap my brain around this.
Me too.
It seems very challenging because the guidance curriculum, the guidance counselors want them to take 4 years of high school math. So if we're pushing it at 7th grade, they have really no choice but to take those really high level math classes in high school. You're saying if your child does qualify, it's still your choice to push them to that advanced level? Like for example, if my son makes the cut for Algebra 1 and he takes it in 7th grade, I could still say, no, let's wait. You
Correct.
take Algebra
Yeah.
in 8th grade and
Yeah.
then take
Oh, yeah.
geometry. So that's a choice. You can request not to push ahead, but you just can't level up.
Yeah, we advocate for that. I do anyway. I'd rather have a child and a parent say, you know what, we're gonna hold off for a second. We're gonna take a
You only
break
have
for
to
you.
take 3 years of math in high school.
It's required for 3 years, but I can tell you that the guidance, at least my experience, the guidance counselors are saying that, specific colleges want 4 years
Yeah.
of high school math.
A lot of this
Yeah.
is precisely driven by the college mania thing, like
Correct.
taking geometry in 8th grade is gonna give me some teeny tiny marginal advantage to go to Harvard or something, whereas the reality is that, well, I'm not gonna get into that, but there's a different reality there, and there's a perceived reality.
Agreed.
So I
Okay,
agree
so
with
it's,
your
there's still parental, and student interaction and decision-making in this model if they choose not to,
Oh, yeah,
like,
oh, yeah,
okay,
100%.
even if they make that.
And that, after we do these presentations, we did this last week, and the audience wasn't as nice as you. But no, I'm kidding. They were super nice. They were totally nice. I'm okay. Those people out there who were there last week, I was only kidding with them. No, everybody was really good. This is something that we've said. We've done this last week, and doing it this week. We want to make sure we have parents have the opportunity to see this. We're filming it. These are going to be available, these slides, and then we're going to send out, some more detailed information about the process and things of that nature, and what we would encourage parents to say and do with their children. Again, I would always err on the side of take it easy, which would decrease anxiety. Yes.
I think, because you're asking for parent input and stuff on this, I definitely think that a non-percentile, way of ranking them makes more sense in such a small school like a RBS. We have one grade that may have 2 classes, and then we have like 45, or 3 classes of 45 or 50, then one only has, 30 kids, and so you're putting them against such a small pool. We're lucky to have, I think, a small class in a great community, and so I don't think the percentile makes that much sense. Like you were saying, you have a cutoff. If you do this and above, you get this, number of points towards that. That makes more sense to me as my 2 cents.
And I agree with you. I agree. I'm just writing down some of these things here. Like I said, if there are any questions, I'll write them down or some suggestions so that we make sure that we keep these things in mind as we move forward with this program. Anyone else? Yes.
What happens in the 26-27 year?
Glad you asked. There we go. So this is the following year after next. We're eliminating the ability or the option for kids to double up on math. We just don't feel it's appropriate. So, and again, could this turn into like an accelerated? There could be an accelerated. We've had some conversations about that. But for now, we're just going to have this, and we'll reevaluate at that point. This is 2 years from now, or 2 years from now.
So if your current 6th grader doesn't score high enough and doesn't have the option of taking algebra as a 7th grader, then their only option for taking geometry is either a summer class, doubling up in high school, or taking it as a freshman.
Correct.
No pressure.
Oh, I
I'm just kidding.
I do feel bad that the
Yeah.
students didn't know, and I'll be honest, we have peer friends in Mountain Lakes who I know literally work with tutors before taking some of those standardized testing measures.
Yeah.
And so I do think there is an unfair advantage for a student who is very math driven, if that's like their thought process, that they get merged together and our rising 7th graders this year didn't know that this was happening. And
Rising
then when they
7th.
get blended together, technically they, because they didn't put extra effort into preparing for some of these standardized testing, they didn't make the cut, so they didn't take algebra in 7th grade, so they can't take it in 8th, and I kind of feel like there's a disadvantage if that child was so inclined.
But based on that, what I think Dr. Fattini is saying is that based on that overall scoring, is that there's still a lot of room within that
Yes.
to make up for it with your marking period. There's 3 opportunities. The Algebra 1 placement exam, that's another opportunity. There's other opportunities so that if you didn't do so well if you happen to not do so well on NJSLA, but you still happen to have the aptitude for that based on the other opportunities, you should be able to compensate for it.
Agreed. However, let me just answer that real quick. So let's just say that we kept the things exactly the same. And our current sixth graders don't have any ability to go into algebra next year at all. None. The following year, those students would have that opportunity to either go into Algebra 1 or Algebra 1 and Geometry. Right? So in my opinion anyway, by us putting this intermediary step in here, that student that originally was on that trajectory to go into Algebra 1 and Geometry would naturally have the ability to go into Algebra 1 regardless of their knowledge of it. Had we not done that, and they went and they were so good, they would go into the Algebra 1 and Geometry anyway. And if they had not had that aptitude, they would have Algebra 1 to go to. So they would be in the same boat anyway. You disagree?
Well, except for the fact that if they don't make the cut for next year, then geometry's not in the cards at all.
If they don't make the cut.
If for some reason they didn't perform well on standardized tests or whatnot,
Oh,
certain ones that they don't
just
make
like
that
kinda like-
benchmark for some reason.
Yeah, this came up last time too. Like if someone has test anxiety or something along those lines.
I'll be honest, I have 3 very different kids, and the one that this impacts the most happens to be my math strong kid,
Uh-huh.
who was told by a teacher in 5th grade, no, you will be taking Apex Math with the combined once you get to 8th grade. So this has already kind of been ingrained, like, oh, no, that's my expectation. And I've already said, like, no, we're pumping the brakes. We might not do that even if it was recommended. But now it seems like that potentially might not be. I agree with what you're saying, that if they were on that track anyhow, it
Yeah.
would make sense that they would follow that pathway. It's just,
And for us, essentially what we've been doing here is having grade 6, grade 7, and then completely skipping math 8 and going right to algebra 1. So then if I'm going to say, okay, let me take the cost benefit analysis of doing a progressive thing like this as opposed to keeping this just so kids can have this opportunity, I'm going to go with the progressive steps. And I feel that the students will naturally fall in place where they're supposed to be. And based on, and I know we don't like the percentiles, but based on how the math teachers have done the percentiles, like I said, and what you alluded to, it's pretty forgiving. So the kids who could go to math 8 would probably have the opportunity to go into, most likely would have the opportunity to go into algebra 1. So I don't think it's any, I don't think it's gonna, like, for lack of a better term, I don't think it's gonna be a big deal. For those small section of students that are gonna be going into math 8 next year and not having, or standard math, and not having the opportunity to go to algebra, I think it's a small percentage.
do we have an idea of whether Mr. Monaco would be doing math 7 versus Mrs. Savage teaching the 8th grade algebra? Like, do we have an idea of what that expectation is?
We have a general idea, but I don't wanna say because
Fair.
well, let's take a look at what we have here. Let's just say, for instance, we have 3 sections of 8th grade, 3 sections of 7th grade. That's 6. So for a teacher to teach 6 sections and other math teachers to teach 3, that may not be fair, or even. And maybe we need to have that one teacher who teaches 3 sections teach 4, and the other teacher teach 5. So there may be one teacher teaching math 8 or math 7 for this group of kids, and another teacher teaching math 7 for another group, just because of the numbers, and they're small. You can get away with more, like a larger district, you would have, pretty much a consistency as far as the teachers are concerned. So I'm hesitating to say, yeah, it's definitely gonna be Mr. Monaco, because we may need to have another teacher teach that one section. To give you a prime example, we have a science class, and teacher's schedule is filled up because they're doing 2 grade levels, and we needed 1 slot to be filled, and we found out that this other teacher has a science certification. She goes, I'll teach that. So there you go. That could happen. I'm sorry to be elusive about it, but
No,
this is
no,
just the
no,
reality
it's
of the
fine.
schedule. Just like
It's just a change in expectations to
Yeah.
be prepared for.
Yes.
Just a thought or a comment on the anxiety that the children feel when
Mhm.
they're approaching this this leveling. I have 4 now in high school, all different math levels, and it's not going to be any. I mean, it was already like this. I mean, we knew the day the mail was coming to find out whether your kid was getting into Apex, and it was like that anxiety and all of that was already there. Like excitement as well, and so I do appreciate. We never knew exactly how those decisions were made. We knew what factors were weighted in, but the transparency here is pretty incredible. And
Oh, thank you.
It's a lot of work on the administration, so we appreciate the time that you're taking to lay it all out for us, and then to be able to communicate by score, at the end.
Thank you for saying that.
That's
I
big
Two
appreciate
sessions and videotapes.
it. And videotapes.
We can, I'm sorry, a few people have said the word apex. Can you tell us what that
No.
means?
I can.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
I was just gonna say, I don't know. I know what it is.
When the program was first implemented and the doubling up of algebra and math, my kid was one of the first Apex kids. Apex was the name of the organization that taught online geometry. So they took algebra in school and then they took Apex geometry online with a professor in Seattle, actually. So, and then they would come in and just review one. So this program has changed constantly, almost annually, and then, Mountain Lakes changed their math order and we changed it back. So
Oh, you're familiar with that, right? You heard about
So-
that?
Yeah.
it's just, yes, so it's just, we've been trying to get it right for a really long time. It's been very difficult, and the main reason we haven't was because scheduling is really difficult. So I think, like, trying to manage it, it's a lot that we're taking on, and because you have to, I don't know, so Apex was just the term that the parents started to use for that accelerated doubling up of math and geometry.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
So just so we're on the same page, obviously, we're also trying to figure out how this feeds into Mountain Lakes. So this setup now, will this be the same basically as what's happening at Briarcliff?
Briarcliff, yeah.
So that when they go to Mountain Lakes, it's not gonna be a situation where they had any specific advantage other than what their parents may have paid for outside of. That's because I even know one of the people on the Board of Ed, and he, starts giving you advice as far as all these different things that you should do so you can get ahead because your kid is gonna be so far behind
Yeah.
coming from here. And yeah, he's a nice guy.
And so you've heard also that there were access to, that one of the things, and this has happened in other districts, that some people get a hold of these assessments and then they teach or they tutor them to these things, and then they get a high score in a placement exam. You go to North Academy, they have these things especially designed for this so the kids can score and get credit and have a fast track and all that stuff. That's an animal that we have to contend with. Yeah. But to answer your question in short, yeah, it's more in line. If I go back to this, this is more in line with what they have in Briarcliff, except they have accelerated math right in between here. It's like a one-step thing. Like, I guess you could say something akin to that. Yes.
Just a quick question, I know that the placement test had already happened.
Mhm.
Is there a reason, I think this is great, I teach in a high school, I'm special ed and math certified.
Oh, you are?
I am, so that's why I was asking.
You think it's great?
I think it's great,
She's
maybe-
math and special ed certified. She said it's great.
I think it's great, I really do. I don't know the exact, sorry, I'm losing my voice, but I don't know the exact percentage, but I felt like the state average in New Jersey, this might be going back a couple of years, but it was like on par, 60% of students were taking Algebra 1 as ninth graders.
Mhm.
So it's not that we have a ton, I work in a big district, but there are, several geometry classes, however, a lot of students on par are Algebra 1. My question to go is there a reason that they didn't say to the parents about the placement test? Because I know for my son, and I'm very realistic of his academic abilities, I do have 3 kids, but I would have said, hey bud, like make sure you just try. So he was given the test, I think there was like a substitute, and he was like, yeah, I think it was like a test, and then when I kind of found out about it, I was like, oh, I really hope you tried on it, and then he was like, yeah, they said it was gonna be graded. So for me, I mean, I was kind of like, I wish that I would have known as a parent, because I would have just
Okay.
kind of been like, hey guys, make sure, two of my boys were joking, like, make sure you guys try this, you know, not, I don't add stress onto them, but just so we know, like, we're taking this seriously. So is there a reason that they didn't tell the parents, or?
I was under the assumption or presumption that parents were aware that this is a
I was
thing,
not, yeah.
and this happens every year, right? Is this
That was my only thing, is
because kids in the past have gone from 7th into 8th, they've taken those algebra placement exams, and is there a notice that goes out with those?
I've never received it. My oldest is gonna be in 8th grade, my other is in 7th grade. I've never gotten anything, so perhaps I missed it. But
Well,
I
that's
wasn't,
something
I
I'm
mean,
gonna write down.
that was my only thing.
I didn't receive anything
There
either,
was no
yeah, I have a
notification.
6th grade, so.
Yeah, I was 6th grade, so I was just wondering, like, I didn't know, like, you were asking, maybe it was like an anxiety component, but I just
Yeah.
would have been like, hey guys, let's make sure we take this test seriously, because my 3rd grade daughter, when she was doing NJSLA, she was all like, I gotta do this test, just try your best, you know, that's all. But for this, I would have just been like, hey guys, make sure, you know, let's.
So,
We didn't tell them because we didn't want to increase anxiety.
Exactly.
No, but we also in the past, that you wouldn't have gotten anything in 6th grade, you would get it in 7th grade to determine about 8th grade. And I feel like it was back in the day,
yeah.
you know, like you would get like, okay,
Yeah, I'm not like
Do
being
well.
super negative, that was my
Yes.
only thing, is maybe moving forward, I just would wanna know, why would we not be notified, a quick, you know, hey, just so we know the placement test is coming, make sure you get a good night's sleep, good breakfast,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
I don't know,
something
that's,
that should
I
go
was
out.
just a little like, oh no,
Now you're gonna.
uh-oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I hope you
Yeah.
took it seriously,
It's
cause
very
my
difficult
one's pretty good,
to
like.
get out of that trap.
6 to 7,
Yeah.
This is the exact reason why we hold sessions like this,
Of course, the
because
feedback, yeah.
I never forget it.
if we don't have something that's overt like that, and say, you know, we didn't get this, I'm like, what? And, okay, now we have to make sure it happens.
If a
Your
student.
wife has her hand up.
I know. But I never was I could go. If a student, so 88's the cutoff, student gets 87 in your totals.
Mhm.
Are you guys gonna say, well, you know, let's give that student the opportunity, or are you just
No.
gonna?
Line in the same.
There has to be, right? Because then you can say, oh, my kid's, you know, if I was like, oh, my kid's not a good test taker, or this, it's just, it's cut and dry, there's no,
Yeah, where does it stop?
yeah,
You know,
and it
like,
just keeps spiraling.
that's where you get into the teacher recommendation, like, well, you know, and is it because they're a good kid? Well, they may be a good kid, you know. I'm a good guy, I don't belong in algebra or geometry, like, you know. Yes,
Mr. Frattini, of all that criteria, you have everything right now except for the NJSLA scores?
correct.
Oh.
Well, I don't have the algebra placement exams, me personally.
Because they
I know
just.
they took it,
Okay.
yes, so. I was taking other data, so.
Were they told that that
Yeah,
test
I don't know.
No, that's okay.
was applicable to
No.
algebra 1 test?
That's what we're just looking
That's the same thing with the rest.
Oh, so it's, oh, no.
at. So are we still using the Apex program or is someone here? So it's, this is all live?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, back to the chart where with the percentiles and the calculations, was there, you're not including a calculation for NJSLA?
No, we are.
This year, I thought there was a blank one, like,
The examples I gave
one of the examples of that.
were blank because we didn't get the results for this yet, and they made one up of this, you know, there's a hypothetical.
Can I ask another question?
Just to see.
So the algebra one,
Show you what it would look
placement
like.
exam was empty. Okay, understood.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I think the word, what I was thinking before was, I was saying norming because we're talking about percentiles, I meant reference. So Lincoln B and C, what is that reference to? Like,
It's an exam, it's a computer assessment.
but
It's
all
a
of these
benchmark.
different assessments are all benchmarked or referenced to 7th grade standards?
Yes.
Okay, I guess my question was just like, why are there so many of them? It's a lot of tests for a placement in a single class, right?
This is the marking period average on their progress report. These are the assessments that we give, the benchmark assessments, for all the grade levels. Obviously, we have their standardized test scores, and this is the one, I think, that's really gonna point us in the right direction for algebra.
Just
Yeah.
so understanding the link, like what time of year are those, I'm just trying to understand how often.
Form A is typically given at the end of, by the end of September, right, along with your DRAs and things of that nature for the younger kids. And Form B, I believe, is like January, February, and then Form C, I wanna say sometime in the end of May, or I can't remember, to be honest with you, but it's beginning, middle, and end.
Yes. Do you think in the future that information would be conveyed, not just a lump sum at the end of the year, but when those assessment scores come in, that parents and students would get an understanding of where they're falling instead of having to wait until August?
So parents will get notices, right?
Mhm.
By this, by
by
the
the
school,
state,
right?
yeah,
You already get these.
correct.
Lincoln B and C, do you not get those?
I'm not familiar with having received them.
All right, and then Algebra 1 placement exam, I'm assuming that you have,
I mean, it might even be
anybody have an
Genesis.
older child that has gotten that exam?
I have 2 older kids, but I don't recall
Is it-
getting it for either.
I'm looking
of
now
them.
to see.
You-
if it's
you
in
have-
the-
It's your child's assessment, you have the right to look at the assessment, to know the score at the very least. You know, you may not be able to take the Algebra 1 place exam home,
Right.
but, you know, you should be able to have access to what those grades are. So the short is yes.
And because you're using the bell curve with the 80th percentile, well, the percentile breakdowns, there's not a risk that there wouldn't be enough students that would meet, that would qualify for a certain amount to actually hold the algebra class in 7th grade, or to, you know what because you're assuming that you're taking the kids that score in the top percentile compared to their peers. So it's not that you're having kids that are not scoring high enough academically on a more traditional grading scale
Yeah.
to put at risk the fact of maybe not having enough kids to hold in a class. Does
So,
that make sense?
well, let me see if I got this correct. You're wondering if the students that take that from 6th grade going into 7th,
Mhm.
that maybe there's not enough kids, or no kids, not enough or no kids.
Not enough,
To not
because you're
even
saying
hold
that the parents also could, give information, say like, let's not worry about Algebra 1 in 7th grade. You can take it next year.
Uh-huh.
If there's enough, what if there's not enough kids that then fall into that, I've met the criteria, my parents say it's okay, I'm taking. If you have like 5 kids
So-
that fall.
Yeah, if there's 5 kids that fall into that category, and after all said and done, some parents are like, no, you're on the cusp, we don't want you in, all that stuff. And you're left with 5 kids. That's what you're saying? Do we still hold the class?
Yeah.
Yes. Because that's the right thing to do for those 5 kids. That, to me, is akin to, well, there's 5 kids that, they need support, but there's only 5 kids, we don't need to give them basic skills class or something like that, Like, I wanna give kids what they need, I had this one kid in 2nd grade, like, probably about 3 years ago now. He was so good in math, like, I had to give him like 7 or 6 different assessments. He was scoring anywhere from 7th grade to 13th grade, college level stuff. I had to design a special program for him. I had a former student that was a senior who was awesome in math come down once a week to work with him. I had Dr. Myron, the high school principal at Milburn. He has a PhD in mathematics from Princeton. He came over, did an assessment with him. He was like, wow. Like I couldn't grade his homework. The 2nd grade teacher couldn't grade his homework. My assistant principal, her husband was an engineer. Her son was going to Princeton for engineering also. I don't even know, some type of math stuff. They did his homework for him. They were doing that stuff for him. I was like, this kid is off the charts. We could barely meet this kid's needs. It was like a struggle. I was like basically teaching this kid myself, but it was very difficult. The parents wound up taking him, going to a gifted town school. But the fact of the matter is, everybody had their hands up in the air with this kid, and the choice was work as hard as we possibly can to give him what he needs at that time, even if it kills us, or me. Or just go to the next chapter. I don't know, give him the next book. That wasn't acceptable. You got to do the right thing.
And what is the class size cap at? So to your question, like what is the max that's allowed for the class? Like if you're going into, 8th grade, like what do they cap the class size at?
I don't think there is a cap. I don't think we have any guidelines in this district. Like in a larger district, you probably know that, yeah, there's classroom guidelines. And then when you get into the middle school, then it could be like 30, 32, because they expect them to be a little more disciplined, so on and so forth. But here, anywhere from 30 to 40, that could be the entire grade level. So like we don't necessarily have a class size. If something gets untenable, then I think we would just take a look at it on a case by case
Right,
basis
okay.
and say, you know what?
Maybe
two
run like
sections.
2 sections of the same class, okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Any other questions? Alright. What's so funny?
No, I'm still trying to just wrap my head, because it literally has changed for all 3 of my kids.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay,
It's good.
I'm rolling with it.
Alright, let me just go to my last slide. I gave you all these examples, and if you have any questions, and here's my last slide. Alright, thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
evening.
Thanks.
If you think of anything in the middle of the night, send me an email. I may check it at that moment. But seriously, if there's anything you ever think of, especially you, then email me and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can with the answer.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.